next up, what we're going to have here, I'm going to share my screen again. You can see we just had card testing with Paul, but next up we got using Argo CD at scale securely. And Dan is going to be joining us, who's the co-founder and chief open source officer at Codefresh. Let's bring Dan on and get to know what Dan's going to talk to us about more with that topic. Let me remove my screen, bring on Dan. Hey, Dan, how's it going, man?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Excellent mic, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So cool. You're going to be talking to us about Argo CD. I'm really
Yeah.
interested in that. Maybe you can give us a quick overview. Well, actually, let me back up. Tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll jump into your session. How about that?
Sure. So my name is Dan Garfield. I am the co-founder and chief open source officer of Codefresh, and I am an Argo project maintainer. I also work on the Open GitOps project with CNCF and do a few other random things.
Nice. Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm excited to learn more about all of that. And I'm going to step away and let you take over and let's get your screen on stream. I almost fumbled and switched those words there.
All right. Sweet. Well,
Cool.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about security. And I want to just, again, on my background, I work on our open source program at Codefresh. And I don't consider myself a security expert, despite, maybe installing a few games on the school computers in high school or things like that. But I don't think that really counts. But I work with a lot of security experts, and I've spent a lot of time working on Argo's security program. So I have a few kind of tips and tricks and things to share. And just some of this stuff is generally applicable. And I'll introduce the project Argo if you haven't heard of it. Before I do that, you can follow me on Twitter at @todaywasawesome. I mostly talk about GitOps and Argo CD and Argo Workflows and those kinds of things, just general, Kubernetes related stuff and jokes and other nonsense. So check me out at @todaywasawesome. And we'll jump in. So if you're not familiar with the Argo project, it is a really, really exciting project. It's been growing incredibly quickly. We'll talk about that more. And it's been incredibly popular. It is a CNCF project. It's currently in incubating. We're working on graduating the project right now. It's made up of 4 tools: Argo Workflows, Argo Events, Argo CD, and Argo Rollouts. Argo CD is the GitOps operator tool. And then beyond those 4 projects, we actually have Argo Labs, which is sort of a sandbox area where people are creating a lot of tooling around these different main tools of the Argo project. And so this project, Argo Workflows, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a generic workflow engine for Kubernetes. So you can do data pipelines, you can do CI pipelines, really any kind of workflow process that you want to create. That's what Argo Workflows is for. It pairs with Argo Events generally. Argo Events is used to trigger things like workflows, and it can trigger other kinds of events as well. It's basically a general sort of, not exactly a messaging queue, but more like, somebody made a commit to Git, that fires off to Argo Events, and Argo Events knows where to route the information around that. Argo CD, like I mentioned, is the GitOps operator. That's a tool we're going to talk about today. And Argo Rollouts is a progressive delivery tool. You can do blue-green deployments, canary releases, those kinds of things. And it works with like most generic load balancers, which is really cool. You don't have to necessarily use a service mesh or something like that. So the Argo project, like I said, it's been growing incredibly quickly. Argo Workflows and Argo CD. Argo Workflows is the fastest growing and most popular workflow engine for Kubernetes in the world today. And Argo CD is the fastest growing and most popular GitOps operator in the world today. So these 2 projects have really been standout success. They've grown incredibly quickly. We love to see that. And part of that growth has been that we have some really amazing users. Within Argo, we've got Tesla, Ticketmaster, Google. We've got defense companies. We've got healthcare companies. We've got banking companies, financial companies. So security is a big concern. And obviously, security is a big concern for everybody. But this growth has pushed us to really spend a lot of time examining our approaches to security in the project. And we actually established a SIG security for the Argo project not too long ago. And if you follow the Argo news, we actually had our first 0-day CVE that we needed to kind of publish and go through and actually use the processes that we've been developing over the last few years. And it went really well. We were able to find that issue. It was disclosed privately to the maintainers. The maintainers put together a patch, and the CVE was disclosed along with the patch for the last 3 versions of Argo CD, which was a phenomenal success in my mind. But this brought up a few different things with security and how we approach it with Argo CD, especially. So I don't know how many of you in the audience are Argo users, but I'm looking at the live stream, and so if you have comments or questions, I'll glance over there and try to address those as we go along. I like to be a collaborative talk. When it comes to Argo CD, as a GitOps operator, there are essentially 2 main models that people use when deploying it. And we're going to talk a little about that, and then we're going to talk about some of the security implications of those 2 models. One of those models is what we call hub and spoke. Basically, you have an instance of Argo CD that you've installed on a Kubernetes cluster, and then you have Argo CD manage the deployments on many other Kubernetes clusters. So basically what you do is you have multiple targets available to Argo CD, and Argo CD is a GitOps operator. And if you're not familiar with GitOps, I mean, I guess we probably could have spent some time on that, but check out opengitops.dev. Let's just go there really quick so you can see it. This is a standard for how GitOps should be operated that Codefresh founded with in a partnership with Amazon and Azure, GitHub, a few others. And basically, we've had over 70, 80 different people contribute to this standard. But basically, the idea is for GitOps, you need a component that is monitoring what's happening in your runtimes at all times and what the desired state as defined in a version control system like Git is. And so when you have those 2 things together, that's what Argo CD is doing. It's basically monitoring production, and it says, hey, some change has been made in production. That wasn't made in the desired state. So let's pull and reapply the desired state. And this is a really, really much better way to operate your infrastructure and operate your environments than the traditional way of I have a pipeline that maybe at the end of the process, it connects to the runtime and makes changes, and then it forgets about it. And so what happens in production, you don't always know. So GitOps is inherently a much more secure way to run your infrastructure because it's being constantly monitored for drift, which can then be automatically fixed or cause alerts or those kinds of things to get you to go and actually see what has changed and why it's changed. Because you don't want things to go through out of process changes to your environment, right? So GitOps is already just an inherently more secure way to deploy software. Now, this hub and spoke model is very popular because Argo CD does support RBAC and different permissions for different groups. So you can have each team have access to one Kubernetes cluster, but there's only one instance of Argo CD to manage. And this is really convenient because you can manage only a single instance of Argo CD. Now, Argo CD, of course, needs to be able to connect to those Kubernetes clusters. So there are a number of different ways you could deploy this, right? You could have, let's say you're using Amazon with a VPC, and you could have your instance of Argo, just by nature of the network, has access to those Kubernetes cluster APIs, but those aren't accessible external to that virtual private cloud, that virtual private network, basically. So that's good because then you're limiting kind of the attack surface, and then you expose Argo CD just to the users that need it. Maybe you have an allow list of IP addresses, or maybe you have people VPN in, or that kind of thing. So that can be a pretty secure setup, but there are definitely some challenges with how role-based access controls and how permissions work when it comes to very large teams or teams where maybe you have less trust. And in security, we generally don't want to have trust in our users, right? So we'll talk about that in a sec. To contrast the hub and spoke model, there is what I call the standalone model. And this is basically each Kubernetes cluster gets its own instance of Argo CD, and that instance can deploy to that cluster only. And this model is also very popular. It's especially popular. What many companies kind of have happening is that they will see many different teams. Basically, they each run their own Kubernetes cluster, and they'll each create their own Argo CD instance. And this should be familiar to people that maybe in the old world where you were doing lots of Jenkins, lots of companies, they have like 5,000 Jenkins instances. But what are the problems with that? Well, the big problem with that right off the bat is that organizations that have thousands of instances to keep track of generally don't. So they're managed by lots of individual users. And I know I talked to a friend of mine a while ago who had a similar kind of approach with Jenkins, where basically each team was running their own. And he was saying, yeah, there's like 5,000 instances of Jenkins in our company, and 95% of them have open CVEs and are totally out of date. And sometimes they're out of date because of plugins and incompatibility and stuff like that. So that's not a situation you really want to get into. So the standalone is nice because each instance is standalone. So if somebody were to gain access to one of those instances, it doesn't necessarily allow them to get access to these other instances out there. So that's good. So your kind of impact, security impact of an issue becomes smaller. But on the other hand, most people end up then having those instances be out of date. And then you also take a really big hit just on the clarity of your software delivery process. So team A is working on these services, team B is working on these services, and they don't have access to each other's Argo instances. And so they may make a change and the other team's not aware of it. And then there's some kind of regression or some kind of disruption in your services, and team A doesn't realize that it's because of a change that team B made, and it takes them a while to figure out and track down where that comes from. And meanwhile, all of that time is downtime or worse experience for your users. It's very expensive. And so what happens generally in those cases is companies start moving much slower in how quickly they deliver software. And once you start delivering software more slowly, then your software starts to get out of date. So now you have another security problem, and you're not able to just compete with in your market. You're not able to make as much money and be as successful because you're not able to move those bits faster. You're not able to ship as quickly as you want to. So the standalone model has some benefits from a security perspective, but it also has some drawbacks. The other aspect with standalone that we see a lot of is in edge. So if you look at a company like Chick-fil-A, they use an Argo CD cluster in basically they have a Kubernetes cluster in every single Chick-fil-A location, and they have Argo CD on each of those clusters that is managing and deploying all of their software to all of those to each of those instances. I believe that's the way they have it set up. They did a talk at GitOpsCon not too long ago, and I think they are doing a talk for the Argo meetups. If you're on Meetup, the Meetup platform, go check out, look for Argo, and you'll see Chick-fil-A is actually going to give a talk. I think it's in a few weeks. Anyway, so I don't know if that's exactly how their setup is, but that's a very common setup. So what we find is that these standalone instances, that's really nice because from a reliability standpoint, if your centralized service were to go down for some reason, all of these instances continue to operate off of their source of truth, which is in Git. And so you don't have to have this centralized instance. And if it went down for some reason, you could still update and keep everything in sync across all of your instances. So it's very popular with Edge. It's very popular with small teams. And then, of course, we do see kind of a combination of these two things where people do this hub and spoke and they do some standalone instances. And sometimes they do that for they want to have different areas updated in different schedules. So they want to have an update go out to Europe and a different update go out to Africa. Those might be different, sets of Argo instances. Though you could do that with a hub and spoke model as well. So why does this matter? I can just feel the audience is just like, okay, we get it. You can deploy Argo CD in these different ways. Why is this important? Well, one of the reasons that it's important is because of the trade-offs. And because there is something that's going on within Argo CD that isn't unique to software delivery by any means, but should look familiar to people who are familiar with different attacks on CI systems. So if I look at config management tools, you've got a lot of popular ones. Here we're looking at Helm. We've got Customize. We've got JSON it. Config management tools are really nice, and most of us use them, right? I can install a Helm package. I can put in some values files. I can grab a customization, and I can make a few little tweaks off of the base and add an overlay for each environment. With JSON, I basically have a whole programming language I can use to generate configuration. So these tools are really, really powerful. And some people may, if you remember a few years ago, Travis CI had a vulnerability basically where, and this is actually kind of common in CI systems, and it depends on a lot of times on how people have implemented their CI systems. But basically, someone could open a pull request on like an open source repo, and that pull request could modify the pipeline that was going to run, and it could do things like echo out all the environmental variables. Well, it turns out that in some of these CI systems, those environmental variables would include things like Git tokens. Okay, well, now you've opened up access to people to write to your Git. That's a problem. So those kinds of things can be tricky. And likewise in Kubernetes with these systems, sometimes people with Helm or Customize, they will reference environmental variables to inject secrets into their manifests. Now, this is not really a great practice. What is better is use something like sealed secrets or SOPs, or use HashiCorp Vault, which then provide basically a secret store that it's only available in the environment. And these, your manifests basically aren't aware of them. And so like with something like sealed secrets, it basically mounts the secrets onto the container where it's running so that the runtime can access it. And in that case, you only need those secrets present on your production cluster or your target, wherever that infrastructure is running. So doing secrets in this way exposes you to more risk. And when I say this way, what I mean is if you're like injecting secrets into your manifests, well, those manifests are potentially referenceable. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's kind of two things to think about. One, the way that Argo CD works, it's connecting to a Git repo. And it's basically pulling information from that Git repo. It's pulling a Helm chart or a customization, JSON configuration. It's pulling the images and things like that. So your Git repos are actually a really, really critically important part of your secure software supply chain. Because if people gain access to modify those, then they have the ability to potentially deploy something to production that is spooking on other things within your Kubernetes infrastructure. Maybe it's looking for secrets, whatever it is. And obviously you should have your permission set for your Kubernetes services so that in their runtimes, they can't do those things. But if you lose access to Git, regardless of whether, if people gain write access to Git, regardless of whether or not you're using Argo CD, you're going to have some challenges with your runtimes potentially exposing and offering privilege escalation and, crypto mining and all those kinds of things. So that's an issue. But the other issue with these config management tools is that they are designed to be very user-friendly. That sounds like a good thing, right? Well, if I'm using Helm, for example, and I want to reference resources, it doesn't really differentiate between local paths and external URLs. Same thing with Customize. So, for example, let's say that I'm sitting inside of an Argo CD instance. I have my role-based access controls. I'm only allowed to deploy to this area. If I make a malicious Helm chart, there's a potential way that I could try to reference resources that are only available to Argo CD. Or there's ways that I could try to reference resources that are only available through URLs. So I could reference an external chart or something like that that's pulled in, or an external value that's pulled in, or an external container that's pulled in and executes. So what does that really mean? Well, it means you should have secure Git. You need to make sure that this is secure. And if you're granting access to a user on Argo CD, you you want to be careful that those users are only able to access the things that they're supposed to. So there's not really anybody running today like a multi-tenant Argo CD where they have that's just public to the internet. That's not really something that people are doing. So as far as that would be kind of a riskier behavior because you're allowing people to execute code on your instance of Argo CD. You probably don't want to do that. So most companies, the way they operate with that hub and spoke versus standalone model, they have hub and spoke where they have kind of different teams that have access to certain levels of infrastructure. And then they have standalone instances that are limited to certain teams. So in this software supply chain, your Git becomes critically important to keep secure. And it's not necessarily that you would find a vulnerability in your Git instance. So let's say, for example, I could create a customization that references a customization that is external to my Git repo. So let's say I take Argo CD and I lock it down. And I say Argo CD only has the ability to clone from these repos. Well, I could still make a customization that would be in one of those repos that's on my allow list or my whitelist or whatever. And when it's deployed, when it's actually generating the manifest, it references an external resource and pulls it in and adds it into the chart. And that's not really something that's an expected behavior. That's something that you're expected to do with Customize or Helm. But you could see how that could open you up to potential abuse. So that's something to be aware of. And so when you're making the choice between hub and spoke versus a standalone, you have to think about, do I want to have multiple people have access to this instance of Argo CD? Do I want to have it be standalone and have an additional management headache? Because I have to make these trade-offs, right? I either have a single instance, it's easy to manage, I can put all my teams on it, great. But when I do that, there's the potential that one of those teams could try to engineer some kind of pathway or escalation based on the resources they're cloning or the resources they're referencing with their manifests that you've already given them the keys to do. That's generally not considered a big risk because most companies, it's like, well, my expectation is that my team won't try to go and break locks, but you also don't want to have to rely on that, right? You want to have a trustless system because I've seen before, I've seen at companies where a user's machine, a developer's machine becomes compromised and suddenly they start accidentally deploying code that's compromised, right? So you don't want to have a ton of, trust in your users necessarily, though ultimately like a developer, you can deploy stuff onto the infrastructure, right? And this standalone model where stuff gets out of date, people don't have good communication, everything is siloed off. So this is kind of like something you have to think about when you're deciding how you're going to roll out Argo CD at scale and what kind of permission structure you're going to have. So hopefully this is all making sense so far. And this is actually this issue of trying to figure out how to manage Argo CD at scale is one of the reasons that we created the Codefresh software delivery platform. It's an enterprise distribution of Argo, and it bakes in Argo Workflows, Argo Events, Argo CD, and Argo Rollouts into a single unified interface and management control plane. And basically the way that it works is you have each instance of Argo is deployed as part of a single installation process, and there's an integration layer, and there's shared SSO and security. So you basically set up SSO once with Codefresh, and then that's automatically applied to all of your instances. So I can go and look in other instances, even though I might not have access to deploy on that instance. And we created this control plane where you have a unified UI for these 4 tools that exposes all the information, and you get a control plane that helps you see everything that's happening across all instances. So what that means is, like, with this recent CVE that happened with Argo CD, if you were using this control plane, you'd be able to see, oh, I have 5,000 instances. All of these ones need to be updated. I can go in here and do the process to update them. And that process is a GitOps operation. So it's actually writing to Git in order to have Argo CD update itself. So this is fully GitOps compliant way of approaching software delivery. And just being aware of all your runtimes, that's another really important thing, because if you have 5,000 instances, how do you know they're up to date? If one is out of date, do you know who to work with to get it up to date? Having this control plane makes it instantly much, much easier. And this control plane requires basically a outbound network connection from these instances, so that you don't necessarily have to open up your firewall or something for Codefresh, and all of the information, that's the secure information, the code that it checks out, the secrets, all of that stays on your infrastructure where Argo is running, and doesn't go into the control plane. So that control plane is really useful. And then the second thing that I mentioned is this unified interface, where if you're trying to figure out, if Team A is trying to figure out what happened with Team B made a change that broke Team A's services, you actually get all that information in a single view. So you're not hunting around in Jira, you're not pinging other teams, you're not looking through Jenkins logs, you're not, cruising around GitHub. You basically just have a single view that shows, I want to see all of the deployments that happened during this window. Oh, I can see that Team B updated their service, and this is where the root causes of my problems in my service from Team A are coming from. And I know I can see who committed those changes, who made those changes, and I can answer those questions. So it just answers a lot of questions. What's deployed? And another thing you can do, and this is really important for like Kustomize. With Kustomize, it's really hard to predict if you're changing a base layer. You don't know who downstream might be affected, but I can actually see, I can look at like what artifact is deployed in an application, and it will show me universally across the entire organization all of the teams, all of the instances that have that artifact deployed. So this gives you a much clearer idea of what's going on and where to leverage it. And then as kind of a final note, obviously you can try this stuff out at codefresh.io. It's free to try, and it's free to use with a couple of clusters. But we actually use Snyk as part of our scanning process of Argo CD. So one of the reasons that we were really happy to be invited to come and talk at the Big Fix was because we actually use Snyk within the Argo project to scan for vulnerabilities. It's helped us identify issues that we can fix and get taken care of before they become issues in the community. And we use it internally at Codefresh for our platform as well. So that's something that we trust, we believe in it, and having that clarity of vulnerabilities as they come up, being able to fix them, make sure libraries are up to date, whatever those things are, it's a really easy platform to use. And it's one of the reasons we like it. And we actually do recommend it for our users who are using either just Argo in the open source, or who are using Codefresh, the enterprise version of Argo, and they're using it in financial services companies, defense companies, healthcare companies, companies where security is really, really important. So with that, I hope that approach to, should I do standalone? Should I do a hub and spoke? And understanding it's less that there is a specific vulnerability that needs to be patched. It's more like, do I understand what it means to give somebody Git access? Do I understand what it means to give somebody the ability to deploy software on an instance? And some people will do some interesting variations on these things, but at the end of the day, it's really important you keep Git secure. And it's really important that you think about your configuration management tools that are being used and the implications of how people can reference resources. So with that, would be happy to answer any questions or talk more about Open GitOps. And again, thanks for listening to my talk. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was awesome, Dan. I'll be honest with you. Like, my background's in development, and Kubernetes and all the stuff in that space has always seemed so interesting, but also a little bit like intimidating for me. And so, I don't know a lot about it to really like talk to it. And I feel like silly to maybe, to try and come up with something to say. But I appreciate what you shared, because it helped kind of alleviate some of those questions that I had, and to see what Argo does in response to help with some of the complexities that are part of that.
Yeah, and I mean, most people, they use configuration management tools on their local machine. They're like, oh, I'm going to install this Helm package, or I'm going to build this customization or whatever. And when you're using it locally, you don't really think about like, oh, could I reference something on my machine? It's like, well, yeah, of course I can, because I'm running it, right? But if you were running that in a CI environment, Or in something like Argo CD, I mean, it doesn't really matter where, whoever's applying that, if it's a shared environment, there may be pathways where they can output environmental variables or reference resources that aren't part of their chart because that's their design. They're supposed to do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's great to see the partnership across security companies too to help catch some of the things that might be, leaving people vulnerable in that space. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, glad to see that. Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it. Well, comment in the chat I'm seeing from folks is that, like, for instance, Robert Tables never knew that this existed. It's wild. So open up some more visibility for folks that weren't aware of this stuff. So thank you for that, Dan. Excellent.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.
All right, talk again soon. Have a good one.
See ya.